So, Peter, I want to throw this in the pot this time.
Yeah, go
Climate
on.
change.
Yeah,
I have been guilty in the past. Guilty may be the wrong word, but
yeah.
I used to say very vociferously that the biggest issue or threat that humanity faces in the world we're living in was
Yeah,
climate change.
yeah. Was it
Um,
before you? What does vociferously mean?
very strongly.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Um, and I still want to say that I think it's a huge, huge problem.
Yeah.
But I've already started to turn away from that and slightly tweak it a bit. And I am grateful to some of Dave Bookless's thoughts on this in Planetwise, where some of the so-called, not junk food, but spiritual books that are not biblical
Yeah. Yeah.
have brought me back to the Bible a little bit. And I want to encourage people to be thinking along these lines a bit. And this is how I want to explain it, and then I'd love you to comment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because let's say that your perspective says often, I think, that, science is amazing and it does all these great things, and, the way it's developing now is so fast. And a lot of people say this, that, we could solve climate change. We could stop the emissions. We could get to a point where it was, hunky-dory. But the reason I've slightly turned away from that, repented in a way, and moved into a different direction is that if we solved it, my belief now is that humanity, being what it is, and
Yeah.
being the broken bit that we had on that chart at the start,
yeah,
broken humans,
Yeah.
relationship to God, relationship to each other, fighting over the resources that I mentioned in Tim Marshall's book,
Yeah.
that we'd still end up using pesticides on our crops because we've still got them.
Yeah.
We'd still end up deforesting large parts of the world, even though we might have found a solution in the meantime to get to a net zero. We'd still end up doing all sorts of, well, let me give you, I've scribbled a bit of a
Go
list
on.
here.
Yeah,
We'd
yeah.
overexploit resources, we'd overfish the seas, the consumption of the rich people would still be far too high and the poor people would still struggle. You'd probably find that species of animals and birds and so on would still become extinct. Would we have got a perfect world if we got rid of climate change? And I think I want to say, no, we wouldn't. So before I go any further, do you want to comment on any of that?
Yeah. I wouldn't throw away your thoughts about climate change. I think it's still a bigger issue as it's ever been, but it's just sort of a symptom of an underlying issue, which is humanity not taking responsibility for each other and the environment. And those four things we looked at,
Yeah.
all the problems in all those categories, or some of them, can go that humanity are not, looking after each other and the world. So the underlying issue of us being rubbish is causing
Strong word.
is causing climate change, but it's also causing war.
Yeah.
So I think just because other things seem to be worse or continue to, they all go back to us being not very good at being responsible. So I don't think just because, like, when you were talking about the when you were talking about the environment
Yeah.
not being like the only issue, just because, say, there's a war and something worse is happening, doesn't mean that we should disregard the environment.
No, it doesn't.
It's everything we need to look at.
It is. There's all sorts of justice issues around that, isn't it? Which is why, if we don't solve it that way, we've got to come back to, well, why is it? What is the biggest threat in a way? And so this part of me wants to throw in. I'm going to throw in one verse
Go on,
at the
yeah.
end of this for next time. All right. So let me find the verse. I'll use a different version this time to read it. But this is from the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, and it's the very first section of chapter 1 of Hebrews, and it says this: long ago, in many ways and at many times, God's prophets spoke his message to our ancestors, but now at last God sent his Son to bring his message to us. And this is the bit I wanted to focus on. God created the universe by his Son and everything will someday belong to the sun. So it's basically saying maybe we should come back to Jesus in all this. It might be that I'm talking about the environment as being the relationship of us and the environment, and our relationship with God is all over the place. But ultimately, these things being interlinked mean that there's a turning away from some of the rubbish that you highlighted last time to something better. So I'm going to stop there, but next time, if you've got something straight away on that, we'll come to it. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
cheers.